Hello, my name is David, and today I will be teaching you a little bit about beekeeping. So, about me, I was born and raised in Texas. I was brought up to love pets. We actually have a dog, two cats, and a cockatiel right now. Before we had others, but they passed. Um, I learned beekeeping at UTD. I took honeybee biology that was taught by Dr. Scott Ripple. Today, a majority of these slides will be the ones that he used to educate me. Um, I also learned more from various sites and Reddit. There's constant advancements in beekeeping, so if you love it, you'll always have something to learn more about from someone else. Um, I got my bees last year in July of 2018. That's a little later than usual. People want it before spring, but unfortunately, um, the breeder that I was getting it from, uh, there was like some weather problem, and the queens didn't get back in time, and so it got delayed. But what matters is I got them finally, and they're doing good. So to start off, there's a lot of misconceptions. Like some people think that anything that's yellow and black that's flying around is a bee, but actually there's wasps and hornets. As you can see, those are not bees. Yellow jackets, those are not bees. They actually are a problem a little bit, not much. They love eating like the bee dead bees or something if it's around, or they will infiltrate and attack, and um, they just love eating protein. So you can like set traps around your tree or something that has like sugar water and dried up a banana peel that's rotting sort of, and it'll like create an odor that those pests like, but bees do not go toward it. And just put that in a soda can, and not a soda can, a soda bottle, and they'll just get trapped in there if you put a hole. Yeah. So there's actually one species in North America, the Apis mellifera honeybee, and there's actually more than those types. There's actually like dwarf honeybee is also known as midget honeybees. Those are like really tiny, and you can find those in like I think it's New Zealand or like India or something. But those like are supposed to prefer like manuka flowers, which are are very medicinal, but we don't have them in America because they don't have stingers, and so they can't defend themselves well, and they're just really prone to disease, and they don't produce much honey. It's just very minute amounts. But honeybee, they produce lots of it. That's why they have it in their name. Now, the honeybees are not going extinct. Actually, the bumblebees are. Bumblebees, they pollinate things such as like almonds. But those are the ones going extinct. And yeah, as I said before, honeybee specializes in honey, but it also gets pollen and distributes it across like plants and stuff like that, and also takes it back home to feed their young. But bumblebees does that as well, but they specialize better in pollination. Now, you can see like there's a wasp nest on the left, and that's a honeybee nest colony on the right. They're more vertical, the honeybee ones, and the wasp ones are more horizontal. So that's how you can distinguish the difference between the two. And plus, one probably doesn't taste as sweet as the other. Um, so honeybees, they produce nectar. No, I'm sorry. They take nectar, they produce it into honey. They take that from the plants. They also produce beeswax to build their house. They have a land that they use. There's also uh, nectar. It's 80% water and 20% sugar, and they convert that. They flip it around and they make it a 20-80 ratio. And that just helps with storing it. It helps. They dehydrate it, basically the nectar, and it stores it longer. It prevents it from going bad too, so you can leave it without refrigerating, and it'll be fine. Um, Propolis, that's actually like the outside. It's a harder portion of the beehive. As a beekeeper, you don't really want to have a lot of that because it takes a lot of energy and stuff to make that, and it's harder to break, and it just gets things all messed up. So you want to meet certain requirements when you make your hive, when you set it up, so that you sort of prevent them from producing the propolis all over the place. Yeah, and then they collect pollen, which they use to feed their young as a protein source and carbohydrate source. So there's actually a lot of uh, people who do beekeeping, but there's honey hunting, specifically in like Nepal and other areas where they have like these giant honeybees that like sometimes they prefer like um, poisonous flowers or something such that whenever they make the honey, it's called like mad honey, and it kind of messes up with your mind and makes you hallucinate and stuff. But they actually have like a setup where they go as a group to hunt for the honey, and they don't break it off. Yeah. So there's multiple types of honeybees. There's Apis mellifera, linguistica. There's different types, but the last one, the African honeybee, it's actually not necessarily from Africa. It was just termed that way because they wanted to, I guess, those are more aggressive, and I guess they just termed it due to like stereotypes or something. But um, a lot of wild honeybees um, might be Africanized, and you don't want that to necessarily breed with your honeybees because then your honeybees will become Africanized as well, and then they'll probably get really mad at you and like chase you to the end of the earth, because that's what African honeybees do. They chase them, beekeepers or like anyone, really far distances. So there's a lot of genes and stuff that deal with beekeeping, and there's certain traits that some beekeepers will want. Some will want the bees. Some will want bees that produce a lot of honey, and some will want a lot of bees that specialize in pollination. So as a beekeeper, you get to choose what goals you want, and then you can find a breeder or ask someone to find someone who knows about this, and they can like specifically find the right traits for you. And also, it based off of like your location, beekeeping is different. So always ask your local beekeepers if they know, like, I mean, just to educate you on, or to like give you some tips on when you should be preparing for winter, or like anything that you need to be aware of. So let's talk about the anatomy of the honeybee and the functions. So there's head, which deal with the sensory input and processing. There's the thorax, which they used for flight and locomotion, and the abdomen, which has glands on it, reproduction, breathing. You'll see that vibrating when they breathe, and it's also where their stinger is. So there's three different types of bees you'll see within your hive. There's usually one queen. They have a large abdomen, then their wings, and it tapers. But usually it's the queen when it starts out, it's pretty small, but you'll notice that it's hairless on the thorax of it, which is right about here, and that's usually where beekeepers will mark the queen with like a marker or something, so, a permanent one, so that it permanently stays there for a long time, and they'll be able to like find the queen whenever they look at the frame. The queen grows larger and larger. It gets considerably large. The drone is the male. It does not have a stinger, large eyes, thick thorax and abdomen. There's 0 during the winter, 600 during the summer. As you notice, there's 0 during the winter, 0 during the winter. That's because they don't do anything besides contain the genes to have another, like to reproduce with another queen. So there's no purpose of keeping them in the hive during the winter because they don't do anything. Workers, they have ovaries, but it's not reproductive. The queen actually produces a queen pheromone that prevents the workers from maturing the ovaries to be able to reproduce. There's always a lot during the summer, 60K. The queen produces a lot of them because they're the ones that work a lot. They're always female, and there's 10,000 during the winter. And you can see on this picture that there's a pollen basket on the hind leg. Yeah. So this is the general like the flow of how they survive during the population during the whole year. There's a decreased amount in the winter. Then, as the spring comes, they build up, and that's when you have the main honey flow, and that's when they are able to produce more. When you have more flow, you have more population because you have more resources to make that. Then you have summer dearth, where not that many flowers are like uh, there, so that decreases, and then you have a fall honey flow. So my bees, they had the fall honey flow because I got them during like July-ish. And then they kicked off the drones during fall to prep for winter because during the winter that's one of the most hardest things for the bees to deal with because there's no resources, it's cold, and they have to waste a lot of energy into surviving. So here's the size comparison between the worker, drone, and the queen. Yeah, you usually mark her, but yeah, that's just it. They're pretty small, so be careful not to squish them during your inspections. So this is the stingers. Workers, they have a serrated stinger. Drones do not have a stinger. They actually have like a clasper, which they clasp onto the queen, and for fertilization or reproduction. The queen is essentially a barbless. So if the worker stings you, a worker bee stings you, then she will not be able to remove that stinger from you because of our skin as humans, as animals. Um, but the queen can sting you as many times as she wants to because it's barbless. So don't worry about getting stung by the queen because it'll probably bother her a lot, but and you a lot, but she won't necessarily die. But bees can actually sting other insects with their stingers and not die because um, those other insects do not have like the skin that's tough like humans or bears or apes have. So it'll be able to just sting and come out, but they get stuck on humans. So during the winter, they basically cluster together and vibrate to produce a lot of heat because the idea is to keep whatever to consume what they've produced during the spring and summer to survive for the next spring and summer. And during the early spring, you see they're unclustered. The bad thing about this, the sad thing about this winter clustering is that if there's like other pests like moths or something else like a rat, those can hide within these frames because they're not protected by the bees that are clustering now. So it's always good to make sure that your hive is really clean and good before the winter so that you don't open your hive during the spring and be like, what happened? It's all devastated. So this is a bee that's standing up and with its hind legs up, butt up, and it's producing this scent from this snuff gland that says I'm here. It's to notify that for everyone to be aware that this is where the hive is as well. If you take a frame out and shake it on the ground, all the bees that fall down, they'll fly up and they'll land on the hive and they'll do this no snuff gland pheromone thing to signal that that's where they are. You can see on the right side, that's a honeybee excluding wax. That's what it looks like. They work together to create the frames. Those are the glands from the workers. Now, the queen has glands as well. She produces pheromones that inhibit the worker ovary development. She produces alarm pheromones as well. And she produces QMP, which is one of the main pheromones that she creates that also prevents the ovary development. Queen reproductive system. So she has a vagina and an oviduct, and when she's born first, she will go and mate with the multiple drones, come back. Oh, and when she mates with the drones, she will store their sperm in her spermatheca. And then she'll lay those eggs for like the rest of her time being in that hive, preferably. Drone reproductive system. So he doesn't have a stinger; he's a clasper. There's like a semen and mucus and bulb, and whenever they reproduce with the queen, he basically attaches onto her and um, injects her with the sperm, and then basically all this blood goes down to his clasper, and he passes away, and then he just falls off, and another drone will come and remove that clasper and puts his own clasper in. So the question is, do drones realize their demise whenever they remove that clasper because they say, "Hey, I have a clasper like that too." What? I don't know. So this is a managed hive. We basically some guy he found out that that there's a certain amount of space. It's bee space. It's called three. It's 3 and 1/8 inches, centimeters, inches. 3/8 of an inch. And if you break that, then they'll like fill up that space with like propolis or something. It just gets all messy. So you want to keep it. You want to keep each frame 3 and 1/8 inch apart, or else it gets all messy, and then your hive it's harder to deal with. Beforehand, they used to also put like hives in. I mean, this is a feral hive in a large, so you can see that it also meets that 3 and 1/8 inch. They just naturally do that. They work together to festoon and to create these combs. So if you pick up a frame and you see a bunch of them festooning or just like holding on to each other, then be sure not to knock them down because they're working hard. So when they first place it, it's actually not yellow, it's white. It's called virgin honeycomb. It's very pliable, don't squish it. It's only used for honey. And as it gets harder, it gets more stronger, less flexible, and then it's mainly used for brood production. You can see over here, this should be pollen because it's like, it looks like pollen, yeah. And then here are like eggs and stuff, yeah. We'll talk about that in another slide. So each of the cells that are used for brood production, they're different sizes. So workers are like 5 per linear inch. Drone cells are 4 per linear inch, so they're bigger than worker cells. And then a queen cell is at the very bottom, and it doesn't have to necessarily be at the bottom, but the idea is that there's a cup. It's a cup originally, and then it becomes a cell when there's whenever the when an egg is planted in there, and they notice its development turned into a queen. They also store honey and pollen into these brood frames as well on the outer edges, not necessarily on the inner ones. On the topper ones more likely, but that's just so it's close to the nursery, right, to the brood place, so they can feed the babies close by. So here's the organization of a feral hive or a wild hive. So we have honey at the very top, pollen in the midsection, and then we have more like worker cells in the middle right here. Then we have drone on the outer edges because those are the ones that aren't as important, so they don't put it toward the center. And then they have the queen cells in the very bottom. Yeah, so we try to mimic that in a Lionstrauth hive, which is this one. Now, people do use like observation hives or stuff like that, but preferably I think it's better for us to not just leave it there, but to like open it and view it, so that you can prevent like diseases from occurring. And you want to take care of your bees, because they're your BBs. So yeah, we put honey on the top. You can see these are different size boxes. We'll talk about that in a little bit, but we generally put honey on the top. Then we want to put queen excluder. We'll talk about that in a bit too. And then there's pollen and brood in the lower boxes. So there's like, since the sizes of worker brood and drone brood are different, so there's a transitional zone that looks a little weird, and you can see that in your hive, and I don't think they're not used because it's not as perfect. So they may store like pollen or something in there because it's not perfectly the size of the insect. So here's a healthy brood pattern. We want to see capped brood and a lot of it. Not, and see how some of these are like open. That means that it's better to have fewer open ones because that means that it could mean that she's not as fertile or something. So she's like running out of sperm or to make our eggs, fertilized eggs. I don't know if you call them zygotes, but she's running out, or those eggs were actually bad and they had to remove them midway through. So we want to look when you inspect your frames, we want to see that it's fully capped. That'd be really good. Then we'll have like pollen areas and honey stores. If it's uncapped everything, that's totally fine. It just means that she either hasn't gotten to it if you originally started, or she's laying eggs in there and you can actually see the egg development. Like in these, you can see actually larvae in here and eggs in these latter ones. And you can actually follow how she planted it then. So you would have planted it from the left side going toward the right. So here's the different stages of the honeybees. When she first plants it, it's an egg, then it becomes a larva, then a pupa, then that's all the immature stages. Now it's at the adult stage, which is a molt. Now it's very white and squishy, and when it first emerges, its stinger isn't completely hardened. His body's not hardened, so it cannot sting you. It's really cute actually, and the sad part is if it falls out of the hive at that moment, if you were to inspect that frame, then it would not be able to come back, and it would essentially die out there. So it happens sometimes, but try to be careful when you handle your frames. So here again is the average development times. So as you can see, the queen, she hatches the quickest. She's female. The workers are female. So the thing is, they both have the same DNA. Not the same DNA, but the same, like, genotypically they're the same essentially. But the question is, what is the difference? How do you make a queen? How do you make a worker? Okay, so the caste determination it doesn't occur at the egg stage. It occurs at the larva stage on the third day of the larva stage. That's whenever you change the diet of that larva. So we'll talk about that in a bit, but generally we're basically giving the queen better food than the workers at that day. And that's what determines whether it's a queen or whether it's a worker. Caste determination for the drone is at day 1 when it's laid, because it's just the chromosomes, right? It's just the DNA. So it's not a phenotypic difference, it's a genotypic difference for the drones, but it's a phenotypic difference for it's a phenotypic difference between the queens, but they have the same genotype. The queen and the worker, my bad. So for the larval stage nutrition, so for the first 2 days, they mass feed them worker jelly. Now worker jelly is composed of 60 to 80% clear fluid, 20 to 40% white mandibular gland secretion. On day 3, the diet changes. So the queen gets fed royal jelly, which is 50-50 of each of the two, and the workers actually get fed more clearer, less of the white mandibular gland, so that it's more clearer. But also bee bread as well, which is fermented honey and pollen. That's why we keep that pollen storage right close next to the nursery, because the majority of those eggs are going to be workers. And then drones. You preferably don't want to have that many drones in your hive because they don't produce much work. This is good if you want to reproduce those same genes in that hive to another hive. Maybe you want more drones, but more likely you don't want drones because workers do more work. Now, you get a large growth within the first 9 days, 800-fold increase There's no change in the cell organization. Cells are capped, and that's how you saw the capping on those previous slides. And larvae continue to eat and spin into a cocoon. It defecates just prior to spinning the cocoon, and then it enters into a pre-pupa stage, which is immobile. And it looks like this. It's very white, smushy, and those are just various stages. And then soon after, the worker emerges. It's white. It's very smushy, and they're fed. They're fed by nurses for the next 5 days, and they can't sting right until it hardens. So sometimes beekeepers want to raise their own queens because they like certain genes that or traits that a certain hive has, and they want to put it into another hive. And so what they do is they take they can cut out, like punch the one of the eggs in one of the frames of an egg that's just a dot, not necessarily like into the larva stage, but preferably a dot or a line, and they put it vertically, and they can put multiple of those on a frame, and then they put it into a nuke or something, or into the same hive up higher, so that the queen doesn't go and destroy it, and then the workers will go and create a queen cup, and then you can remove that and put it into a nuke, which is a smaller version of a hive, and then you can get another hive basically from that. So you want to take the youngest worker larva, not necessarily like a large one that looks like a C, but a line or a dot, or not a dot, because a dot is an egg, so you want a line more preferably, because that's a larva then, not an egg. Queen development, you can see it's very white. That's the mandibular royal jelly. Yeah, so you want to feed more royal jelly. Queen emerges. So yeah, this is an example of, this is a picture of her emerging. You can see that she is, her thorax is very shaved off. That's so you can clearly distinguish that's the queen. Average lifespan, so queen, she lives about 8 years, but beekeepers like to requeen every 3 years, or every 2 years really, because you want some new genes. You want a younger queen to be more fertile and stuff like that. Workers during the spring and summer, spring and summer, there's quite a bit of them, more during the spring, because you have the spring boost and flowers and stuff like that. Similar with fall, because you have the fall boost, but during the winter, yeah, I'm not sure about this one, but in winter they're not supposed to. Oh yeah. During the winter they live really long because they're not necessarily working that much. They're just chilling and just eating. They're not going scavenging. They might not get eaten and stuff like that. So they live longer because they're not as stressed out. Although they are stressed out to survive for the next year. Drones, summer, there's not many of them. Summer and fall, there's a lot of them, because that's whenever you start seeing like swarms and emergences. That's during the latter end of the spring summer end. And then the winter, they get kicked out, so there's practically none of them. So that's why it says 0 days. Yeah. And also longevity is based off of races, subspecies, food availability. So if you have more food, then if it's closer, then they won't have to work as hard, so they'll live longer. Yeah. So here's the population charts, where it just says what I said before, but it also adds the prime swarms and the after swarms for the bees. When you have a buildup and the population gets so large, they start overcrowding, and when they overcrowd, they leave and create another beehive somewhere else. So you'll see a primary swarm and then after swarms, and then you'll see the new queen emerging, the daughter one. So she'll emerge, and hopefully she'll get mated and come back. If she doesn't, then it'll have to restart the cycle, and that will not be good. So the spring summer bee. when they this is a worker bee. So when they emerge, their first jobs are pretty localized. So it'll be close by them. It'll be just cleaning cells, and they start feeding larvae, feeding the queen, which is what a nurse bee is called. They generally always love the queen. Um, so those are the nurse bees that are found near the queen, and they'll always feed the queen. So those are the ones that, if you get a queen from like a breeder or something, a breeder, he'll give you a box with the queen and some nurse bees in there because they'll always love the queen. They won't attack the queen or anything. Um, then they build comb, receive processed food. Yep. Then they're going toward guarding the hive, and then they remove corpses to start going outside, and then they finally forage for nectar. So those are the older bees that you see, and they die within 5 to 7 weeks. It's really short, but there's just a lot of bees, like 500 to 1,000, depending on how fertile your queen is, that are laid a day. Here's a picture of the bees ventilating. Their hind bats. See how their butts are not specifically all the way up, but it's more of like pointed downwards. That shows that they're not producing that nose snuff gland, but they're just fanning because they may be overcrowded. They may it may even just be a hot summer day that push all these bees out, and they just have to ventilate the hive. Having too hot weather is not bad for the bees. It's just they know how to deal with it. But when it gets cold, that's when they have to waste a lot of resources to produce heat. Here's a guard duty bee. He's just standing, has his hands up. His teeth are out. You can actually knock on like a window if you have like a wasp nest outside, and you can see them do the similar thing where they stand up and they shake their hands to look threatening and bite. They actually bite other insects or sting other insects too. They do whatever is necessary. Yeah. So these are orientation flights. Whenever they're going to forage, and before that, they're going to go and have an orientation flight where they basically you see a bunch of them just. I don't want to say swarming, but they're just flying outside of the hive, just trying to figure out where their hive is, so that they remember to come back to this specific place. And they do that for quite a bit. Don't be afraid of them. They're just flying around. And sometimes people get confused between this and swarming, but you'll be able to tell this is not swarming because you'll be able to look at the frames and see if there's other like signals like cups and stuff, that queen cups, to determine if they're swarming or not. There's other behaviors that they do, such as balling, mellifera balling of the queen, Japanese honeybee balling. So you can see that mellifera balling of the queen, they actually, if a queen has if a hive already has a queen, and if you introduce a new queen, and if they want the old queen, they don't want this new queen, they'll go and try to ball the queen and like sting the queen. So it's always good to, like, if you have a bad queen and you found a reed queen, you can remove that queen and then you can wait and leave the queen within the box with her nurse bees in the nest of the hive, and if you lift and then all the other workers will jump on the box, and if it's hard to and if you try to remove the bees, and if they're sticking to it, the box, that means that they really are aggressive and they don't like the queen. But if you can brush them off easily, that means that they're chill with the queen. They want to be near the queen. So that's a good way to tell if a queen is accepted or not. There's also Japanese honeybee balling, where a lot of honeybees will orchestrate like an attack on a hornet or something, and basically vibrate so fast it produces a lot of heat and basically burns the intruder. You can actually look at them on YouTube. It's pretty cool. There's also washboarding. Not many people know what this is, but I mean what it means, what they do. But they basically stand outside in the front of the hive and start rubbing their front two fingers on the let's remind this tomorrow. Yeah, on the doorstep, or however you say, at the front of the hive. There's also robbing of honey, where if you have a weak hive and there's another hive beside it, the stronger hive will come and rob the honey from that weak hive. So you have to reduce the entrance. You have to basically give them like maybe personal feeding source that's contained only that they can get it. I just like putting another box on top and putting it within there. We'll talk about that in a bit, feeding them, but you can do that to help strengthen that colony. Um, so here are the changes in behavior for the spring and summer division of the labor. So you want to basically increase the growth rate of the colony during the spring and summer and accumulation of resources. And then during the winter, you just want to survive. And they do that by becoming generalists. So during the spring and summer, they specialize, and during the winter, they generalize their jobs. Things that can affect swarming. Swarming is really, it's good that they can do that because it shows that they're strong and they're able to like produce well. But it gets a nuisance when your neighbor comes and is like, "Yo, why do I have a bunch of swarms? Why do I have a bunch of bees on my wall?" You know, and then it costs a lot to remove that. So it's better to manage your hive so that they don't swarm. But some factors that can affect it is if you have a larger colony, it's more likely to swarm. If it's congested, it's more likely to swarm. So what you can do is you can keep adding brood boxes or just stuff like just making it larger. It's more space so that they don't get congested. As you can see, is a picture of them overcrowded. And also, if there's a reduced transmission of the queen pheromone, which means that the queen is not doing well, or it can mean that the size is too large and they're just like, oh, we don't smell it all the way over here, because the queen pheromone tells them what to do. Then they'll swarm and they'll reproduce a new queen. Yeah. So to prepare for swarming, the queen is fed less. She's already big as is, right? She has a bunch of nurse bees just feeding her. So they feed her less so that she can slim down and leave and be able to fly, right? But she can't fly now. So they basically push her, and the bees push her to annoy her, kick her out, you know, and then she's fed less, and then she swarms with a bunch of the bees that are already like half the colony will go and leave with her. So when that swarm goes off, you'll see that they're just clustered around like a branch or something. Right then, they're not really aggressive. They're not aggressive because there's nothing for them to defend, nothing for them to call home. So if you can go close to it, it won't sting you because bees are only aggressive around their hive. They don't want you to attack and take their honey. That is, if you don't swat them. I mean, probably if you swat them, then they'll probably get get irritated. But anyway, here is how they vote. Basically, like you can see that this bee that's colored red, he says that, oh, let's go over here. This is a really nice place to habituate. I mean not habituate, to call home, the new home. But this blue one says, no, mine's better. So they keep sending more people out, and whoever gets the more votes they'll agree with each other or not agree, and then they all will just in unison say, okay, we've got this many people, we're going. There's also wattle dance, which is just to tell how close, how good a nutrition source is, like a flower nectar from flower, pollen from flower. And it's basically, the wattle dance tells us direction and distance, and number of surgeons tells you if you have more number of surgeons, it's better, and it's also a better nest. They use that for both like determining nests and also for nutrition, food. So there's a timeline. Queen cell is made day 1, egg is laid. Then she emerges on the 16th day, 21st day. She is sexually mature and developed. Then over 2 to 4 days, she gets orientation flights, mating flights, and then she mates about 12 people. Mating can be delayed about 3 to 4 weeks, and then she begins laying 2 to 4 days after mating. So queen clipping. So I recently found out that in order to prevent swarms from your own hive, you can take your queen and actually clip her wings, like how some people clip like the wings of their birds. It prevents her from flying. So what happens is the queen, she'll still be able to do everything she can do, but she won't be able to fly ever. So if she falls out of the hive, that's not good because she won't be able to fly then. So don't make really sure that you don't drop her out of the hive. If you do, have an open ear because she may make a sound, and watch your step because she might make a tooting sound or something like that. But anyway, I would, if you're experienced in beekeeping and being careful, then you can clip the wings of the queen, and that prevents them from swarming. They'll just land. If they ever want to swarm, they'll just plop down on like the ground, and then you can have a box nearby, and they'll just go inside that box, and then you can use that for another hive. Um, so this is how mating occurs. So the queens, they prefer far DCA sites, which are drone congregation areas, but drones prefer close DCA sites because during the fall and summer, the drones will just be coming back to the house, eating food as well, and going outside and doing their old DCA flight, right? But that one time, the queen doesn't have to do that every day, so she doesn't have to be close to the home. She stores, she eats a lot of food, and then she goes out and she goes to a far place and mates. The reason why they do that is so that if the queen were to mate with her own young, the own drone, that's incestuous, and it prevents and it makes bad. Basically, I'll tell you later on, but it makes like bad bees. Um, so here's the mating that I was talking about before. It's really quick. Drone. See how large he is in comparison to the queen. And he basically passes away whenever after mating with the queen. And here's another guy. He's waiting for his turn. So here's the CSD gene. Here's the consequences of incestuous mating. So basically, if only one gene is present, one type of gene, it is gonna be okay. So if diploid is two genes, haploid is one gene. If one gene is present, it becomes a drone. If two different types of genes are present, it becomes a worker. So, but if two of the same gene is present, so CSD2, CSD2, or CSD1, CSD1, that becomes a diploid drone. And those are bad because they're large and they emit this sort of smell or something that worker bees can, that nurse bees or worker bees can be able to smell, and they can destroy that bad brood before it emerges. And that's why you get that spotted pattern, That's how you know you got that bad thing. And then when you see that spotted pattern, you say, oh, they might have mated with a lot of my own bees, so I'll need to requeen them. So yeah, here's the healthy brood pattern, and this is the shot brood pattern, which is caused by homozygous CSD alleles. So it's, so some people say, oh man, I want to get into beekeeping. I was trying to catch a swarm, but I ended up buying one, and then I caught a swarm after. And I say it's actually pretty good because then you have two different types of genes, and then they can mate. So you have a less likely chance of having that incestuous homozygous CSD alleles. So some traits that are really good that beekeepers will actually selectively breed for are hygienic, cleaning behavior, and disease resistance, because those are the main two ones that cause problems in beekeeping, cause decay of the colony. So this is typically the plot of the wattle dance data. So bees prefer closer areas, but they will go far if that source is really good. But yeah, they generally go 2 miles. So here's the conversion from nectar into honey. It goes from 80-20, 80% water, 20% sugar ratio. It depends on each floral source, but it converts that, flips around, becomes 20-80. There's also chemical changes within it. So an invertase converts sucrose to glucose and fructose. And glucose gets converted to gluconic acid and hydrogen peroxide. Yeah. So if you want to get started into beekeeping, um, it's kind of expensive, especially if even if you get like the basic one, which is like about $330, not including like I guess stuff like yeah, it's kind of expensive. So you can see that here's a nuke of bees. It's smaller, but you can always catch your own bees. Just doodle up swarm traps, and where to put them and what scents to put in them, and yeah, and you can make it cheaper for you. So here's the general covers and stuff like that. You got outer cover, inner cover. Outer cover protects it from the rain and stuff, and from other things entering. Inner cover, it's not necessarily needed, but some people use it because bees will um, they might draw on top of the this super honey super because there's it destroy it doesn't follow the bee space rule. But so I would probably do that, add an inner cover. I have a different type of inner cover, so I don't have that one specifically where it's like a flat board with a hole in the top. But some people actually have a flat board with a hole in the top, and then they have another box on top of that, and that's where they put the feeder. Or no, they put the feeder on top of that thing. Yeah. Um, then you have the honey supers, which are only honey. Now the question is, how do we get only honey there? How do we make it so that the queen does not lay in that area? Well, basically, we put a queen excluder, which has slits that are not big enough for the queen to be able to fit, but are able for workers to fit. And some beekeepers do not like that because they say, oh, it's not natural. Oh, it hurts the bees because the bees have to brush their hair falls off of rage and it just brushes. But I say, I don't want edges in my honey. Thank you very much. But I don't think it hurts them that bad. If they didn't like it, they'd leave. They can feel they are free to leave then. Deep supers, those generally have like brood in there. Yep, because the queen will be in there and she won't leave. Then there's the bottom board, which we'll talk about later. You can usually use that for analyzing the health of the colony by looking at what they drop. And then there's a stand because you don't want it to be on the very bottom, or else ants will climb up. Preferably, you want to put it even higher than the ground than this. You want to put like some a bench or like some cinder blocks underneath it so that ants or like bugs or like raccoons or something does not come and try, or rats don't try to come inside and infiltrate it. So there's different types of boxes. We got the 8-frame box, 10-frame box, 5-frame nuke. This is what nuke you'll probably, if you're going to order it from someone, you'll probably get a 5-frame nuke. They're really small. You can also use these to like start out a hive if it's a small hive. Then you can transfer it over to an 8-frame or 10-frame. It's really what you prefer. If you want if you want like to be lighter, you can use 8-frame. Some people say that the 10-frame is too large for bees because outside like like bees like 8 frames, perfect. Like that's the amount they like. But I mean they'll use what they have, and plus I like 10-frame because it's more space they can use. Also, bot steps are shallows, mediums, and deeps. I like to use all deeps because I'm kind of young and I like to I can lift it. But maybe if I get older, I'll probably transfer over to shallows and mediums. Just because these things weigh a lot, like hundreds of pounds or something. When they get maxed out with honey and stuff like that. But it's what you prefer. You can do whatever you want. So here's the bottom board we were talking about before. So you can have the screened bottom board where basically you can pull out a white sheet that's kind of sticky. You can put like I think it's like cooking spray or something on it, and it's sticky. And basically anything they drop, you'll see it. So you can see like that all this stuff is like droppings of the wax that they broke, or it could be like a problem with wax moths that they don't eat the wax and they drop it down. And then you can actually see these black things or dots. It might be like this one might be a small hive beetle. You'll have like 1 or 2 or 3 of those. Try to keep it low. If it gets like above like 10 or so, maybe put some hive beetle traps. but I like this one. I got this one. This one is like a screened bottom board, and it's has a small hive beetle trap by Green Beehives. They actually, you don't have to buy it from them. They also have like instructions on how they made it, so maybe you can make it if you're handy, or you can just buy it. Um, and basically, it has a like an aluminum pan with oil in it, and basically any of the small hive beetles or something that falls in will not be able to survive, and they'll just die in the oil pan. You can just look at that, and then you can just drain that, take it out, drain out that all that oil with that stuff in there, and then you use that oil again for the next time. Yeah. So here's frames and foundations. So we got wood frames, we got plastic frames, and we got beeswax on the plastic frames. Um, so you can I like to use just normal wood frames because it's I like to see them make the actual wax and like the comb, and it's pretty cool. But the thing is, if you don't like put like metal wirings or like metal string or something uh, to attach like from one end to the other, like an X or something, or just like lines across, then if you tip it over, you're not supposed to tip those frames over, because if you tip it over, the whole frame, it weighs so much it'll just crack off and fall down. That happened to me twice until I learned. I'm like, oh man, I can't just keep inspecting it that way. I gotta look at it straight up like this until it gets like harder and like after a couple of years, then it'll become like filled completely and it'll become like really hard. Then you might be able to do that, but still, I'd probably just inspect it that way. But these plastic ones, you can flip it around. You know, you can look at it like that, and it won't break because it's attached to that plastic foundation. But bees do not prefer plastic foundations, so beekeepers like to put beeswax on plastic foundation in order to promote it. You can also use like this wax foundation that you insert onto the on the wood frame. You can also make that by heating up your old wax and putting it on like on a wood panel that's the same size, and just removing that when it cools down and just inserting that into there, so they reuse their own wax basically, and and that'll help them promote. It'll help promote and help them get enough resources to make the new comb. So here's pure virgin wax, no foundation, almost completely drawn out, but you can see that there's metal wires here, so that's how, if you wanted to inspect it, he could flip it around all he wanted to, because it's held by that metal wiring. So here's a flow hive. Actually, it's some cool stuff. I actually have the flow frames, and I have this. It's a really good hive setup. Basically, I'll explain how the frames work in that slide, but it's nice that you can inspect. You can actually watch, not necessarily inspect them, but like you can watch them put the honey in, and you can actually drain it easily. You literally, all you have to do is take this metal bar, you know, it's like an L, and just shove it in and twist it, and it basically cracks the cells like that, and it allows the fluid, the honey to drain. But people say it's an automatic hive. It's really expensive, $600. But the thing is, you should always inspect the hive, even if you have this, because you don't want to have like hive beetles and stuff, or like pests in your hive. You don't even know it, and then you don't even know what you're eating, right? Because it could be contaminated or something. But so it's always good to like always be aware. Don't just like leave it there and say, oh, it's automatic. I don't need to check it. But it's a really good concept, and I would recommend getting one of these, or yeah, just getting one of these if you are interested in after you've done a couple, I guess, months of beekeeping. But yeah, here's the picture of how it works. How they basically, when you twist it, you break the frame. It doesn't hurt any bees because it's going to be capped already. And then you just break it. Make sure that everything's capped though, because if it's not capped, that means it's not ready, and then you're just drinking nectar that's not honey, and it's not. And you can drink that nectar, it'll be fine. But the thing is, you can't just leave it out to sit, you know, because then it'll go bad. But if you leave honey out, it doesn't go bad. It'll just get crystallized, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So when you open the hive, um, you gotta use a smoker because it masks the alarm pheromones that are produced by the guard bees, and it induces the bees that they think there's a fire, so they start gorging honey, and it makes it more difficult for them to sting you. And I would recommend doing this as well, because it's better to have a little smoke, breathe a little smoke than to get stung. Use a beard brush. You just use it to gently brush bees off frames and stuff like that to move them, um, or to brush them off of you a little bit. Don't hit them too hard because if you hit them too hard, then they'll get aggressive and then they'll sting you. So you can use like horsehair. They use that for the bee brushes as well. Um, so here's hive tools. Um, you can see that there's a how he lifts the frame. So you first want to crack the frame out a little bit by using this top hand. You just crack it because they'll like stick it together, and then you want to lift it out with this hook end. So that's how you'll just hold out each of the ends. Do not like squish on the frame. Just hold each of the ends and just hold it like this. I should have brought like one of the frames, but it's okay. Safety equipment. So you always want to have one of these because, you want to avoid dark colors, sunglasses, drinking alcohol, eating bananas. Eating bananas specifically because, they the alarm pheromone that they produce smell is the same thing, that that's made out of banana. The banana smell. It's the same thing. So that's why a lot of like researchers they use actually banana smell for their fear conducting experiments because it's the same. They just want to standardize everything. There's also EpiPens. Those are really crazy expensive. So if you're allergic to bees, like to like anaphylactic shock level, where you basically get your lungs like get all swollen up and stuff like that, maybe invest in one of these. I'd say if you have, like for sure. But they're really expensive. You can also get these things called allergy shots. You just need to talk to your doctor. It's basically they're injecting intramuscular like bee venom into you in small doses, and you basically produce IgG antibodies, I believe, instead. So it doesn't like it basically like wastes away all that venom, and it doesn't activate any shock or anything. But yeah, ask your doctor about it if you really want to get into beekeeping for sure. Um, Honey extraction on a small scale. So these machineries are like if you're just like a hobbyist, you can always just take that honeycomb that they have, cut it out, then just crush it or like break it, not necessarily, yeah, just break the cappings off, and then strain it. So that's how you separate the wax from the honey, and then you can reuse that wax, as I said before, for the next season. But if you want to keep that same frame, you can get this thing called a serrated bread knife, or a certain bread knife, heat it up, and then just slice it across, and you can see it produces a really beautiful dark honey. She has it right there. Or you could get this uncapper, which is I don't know how much it costs, but there's several ways. It's a scratching fork. There's several ways to remove it. Whatever one you like the best, just go for it. But commercial beekeepers they invest in these really expensive like radial extractors and stuff like that, and it's nice because if you have a lot of hives like 100, 20, 30, 40, 50, yeah, then you might want to invest in one of these because you're going to be using it a lot. But if you're just like hobbyist beekeeper, maybe talk to a local beekeeper like association or something, and maybe they have one you can just use. Who knows? But yeah, it basically spins it. You can make one yourself. Yeah, you can spin it, and then you gotta uncap it first. Uncap it, then spins it, and it basically removes it like with centrifuge. Now there's different types of honey, like each flower. You can see from on this page that each like flower produces a certain color honey, and like since there's so many flowers outside, they might mix and stuff and make different types. So that's why you'll see a lot of the ambers or like dark ambers, because it's just you don't really see that water white if there's a lot of that buckwheat around. Um, but if you have a lot of flowers of one type, like fireweed or basswood, a lot of that nearby, then you may get that water white, and that's beautiful. Yeah. Now there's different types of forms of honey. We got comb honey. We got liquid honey. Comb honey is when you just cut it out. Cut comb honey. You just it's just liquid honey plus honeycomb. It's very visually appealing, and who doesn't like looking at honey while you drink it? I mean, like the honeycomb while you drink it. Um, Now this is where it gets really beautiful. When when you when you leave honey in the refrigerator, you usually leave it out for a long time in a cool area. It actually crystallizes, and you get this gritty type of honey. Now, well, that's cool as it is, but someone took those crystals and they put it in a mortar and they just ground it up, and they refined those crystals from jagged crystals to like spherical crystals. And then they took those crystals, which are now a seed, that's the seed, and they put it into a honey, a new honey that's liquid honey that's like about um, pretty warm, pretty warm. So there's no crystals in there, and then he put that in um, the refrigerator or something, and it created this churned honey, which is it's whipped creamed honey, and it's really tasty. When I harvest my first batch, I'm gonna go and make that because that's gonna be really cool. Yeah. So now on to the scary stuff, pests and parasites. Yeah, beekeeping is actually it's not always happy. There's always sometimes that some unfortunate circumstance will happen and you'll lose your hive. That's why they say if you're starting, have two hives, preferably. That way, if one fails, you can just take the other one that succeeded and then split that the next year. Um, yeah, so or you could just. I mean, you could. It's always good to know this stuff as well. And always, there's always you can just research more and more as well because I don't know everything there is too. But varroa destructor. This is the mites that they basically feed on the hemolymph, which is the bee blood, and um, while yeah, and they basically go in the eggs and the cells, and while the bee is growing, they'll grow along on it and drink the blood, and you'll get um, these deformed bees, and it's usually spread by other bees that are robbing, come into your hive, and they'll drop the mite or something, and the mite will reproduce, and it's really messy. The part is we don't really like um you like there's no like 100% way to remove it forever. What you can do is you can use like oxalic acid after your harvesting period is over, and then just spray a little drop of that as a fume or like a solution across the frame, and basically the mites will drop dead. And you have to do that consistently because remember there's capped brood. Oh, my dog's coming in here. But hi Jimmy. But the but since there's capped brood, you have to do that consistently for like a couple weeks because those capped brood will not get affected by this oxalic acid. So the mites will be safe within the capped brood. So you have to consistently do that. Now there's greater wax moths, lesser wax moths. These are just moths that they love eating like dark old brood. I mean, not brood and like wax. And if you see like a wax moth, if you see a moth, I saw one of them, and then I saw like a wax moth in my hive, and I had to clean that out. You gotta catch it early, or else you get this they basically um, they basically um, they drop eggs and then they become larvae, and this larvae go and eat the drop eggs, and the eggs will go into this. They'll go next to the wood and they'll like grow. Oh no! They'll drop eggs and then the larva will go and eat and leave cocoon like a cocoon, um, like webbing, and then it'll eat up, and then it just reproduces and does more and more. So if you see like these things on the side of your hive, inside the hive, on the inside of it, like these cocoon things, just don't cut that out and remove it, because that's what this thing is, you know. Or you could fix it by just take a frame out that doesn't have the queen on it, shake it off so the bees are off, and then freeze those eggs, and then put it back in, and then the bees will go and clean and remove all that stuff out. Now here's small hive beetles. These guys, you'll see them running around when you open the hive. They're pretty small, and the thing is, since they're so small, bees cannot go and sting them. They can't grab them. It's so hard because they have like this shell that's really slippery. So you'll see them. The bees will go and corral all these hive beetles into an area or something, and that's why we have these hive beetle blasters sort of thing, that they fall within this area. Or you can have what I had, which was that foil pan with that screen that prevents the bees from going in there because the bees are too big. But if you don't watch out for them, they might poop in your honey, and then it causes fermentation, and you don't want to eat that because that's gross. Oh, I forgot. Going back to Broad Destructor. If you live in Australia, they don't have Broad Destructor there, so I would really encourage you to look into beekeeping because it'll be fun, and you don't have to like worry about the mites, you know, because they haven't spread there yet. Now AFB, American Foul Brood. Foul Brood, basically, I think it's like a spore, I think. Yeah, it's a spore, and basically you can check if it's there by using like a toothpick and just smush open a cap, and if it's really like sticky, yeah, then it's infected. You have to use antibiotic treatment. Commercials, they just like, or the old times, you know, some old timers, you know, they just like to burn it if it's really infected, because you don't want to risk that into another place. And you can't really reuse the equipment, some of them say, because you don't want the next hive to get it because it's a spore, right? And those instances have live through like hard, difficult conditions. There's also European foul brood. You'll see the larva. It looks like pretty bad, yellow, dried out, rubbery. Same thing, you know, you got to turn it out, try antibiotic treatment, or burn it, you know. Now, honeybees protection, they go through social defense. They have hygienic. This is why we need the good traits on our honeybees, you know, so that they can clean themselves and, you know, defend better. Yeah, and there's a social defense and there's a immune system. So the immune systems are like genotypes as well, but it's more on it's poor at a poor defense at an individual level. Yeah. Now winter. This is actually a lot of beekeepers will open their hives during the summer, and they'll be like, "What happened to my bees? They're all dead. Why?" So something happened during the winter. So bees survive against these pests during the summer. So why does the colony collapse during the winter? It's because there's no birth rate and there's less nutrition. They're working on surviving, not necessarily defending against all these pests and stuff like that. So they just get attacked by all these pests so hard that they can't deal with it, and they just collapse, you know. So you have to always, you know, inspect your hives during the summer and stuff like that to make sure that, like, maybe every 2 weeks if you're a hobbyist, as you can, you know, or every week, you know, if you want to prevent, especially during like the swarming periods. But during the winter, you know, after you harvest your honey, you know, you gotta give them back some food, right? Because they gotta survive during the winter. So you can, so after the harvest, you can give them a sugar solution with water, 2-to-1 ratio. And then during the winter, you know, because it's really cold, you don't want to give them the sugar solution, or else the sugar will drip down and freeze their wings, and they won't be able to vibrate, and it just will destroy all of them, especially if you put it right above where they are clustering. So you give them raw sugar during the winter. You want to have 1 to 2 deep brood boxes, and then 1 deep of honey or sugar in the colder climates, and then 1 super of honey or 1 super of honey / sugar in the warmer climates. This is because in the colder climates they have to work more. They have to vibrate more than in the warmer climates. Um, like in Texas is not even snowing yet. It's already January or December already passed. It didn't even snow. So it's been pretty cold though. But it's been cold and warm, cold, warm. You know how it is in Texas. But yeah, you can feed them by taking like a mason jar, poking some holes in there. You know, one, two, three, the tiny, and then in your solution, your mixture, what do you call it, and flipping it, and then your solution because it's dissolved, right? And you flip it around, and then it won't drip because they'll be able to drink from it though. Yeah. Now when it gets really cold, okay, so torpor is basically what they do when it gets really cold. So when it's above 54 degrees Fahrenheit, bees can fly. If it's less than 54 degrees Fahrenheit, bees cluster. They don't necessarily go out and fly. They just like stay inside the hive and chill. Um, because it's really cold. But when it gets really really cold, like 0 degrees Celsius or less than that, so 32 degrees Fahrenheit or less. Bees will torpor, where they, as you can see over here, they're just staying frozen. These are bees outside, they're just frozen, and sometimes beekeepers will open up their hive in the summer, or I mean, not really summer, but like in this, like right after winter when it's pretty warm, or I mean, like maybe when it's really cold too, and they'll see their bees, and they're like, wait, why are they not moving? Well, they're probably in torpor, and the thing is, you don't want to always take them out of torpor because when you take them out of torpor, their metabolism increases, and then they have to waste more energy. Oh yeah, but here's the cluster, as you can see. They might be in torpor. You don't know. We have to inspect closer and see if they're moving or not. So checking on bees during the winter, because we don't want our bees to be able to die during the winter when we can do something about it. So on a sunny and warmy day, you can open up your hive, look, and refeed, because you don't want them to die of hunger. Some beekeepers like to knock on the hives, even when it's cold. The bees will buzz and back. The bees will buzz to reply, they're buzzing. But that increases the metabolism for the next couple hours. And that's not preferred in colder climates because that's them wasting food, that they need. So if you preemptively like put like a weight sensor or a temperature sensor in the hive, then you can just check on it and see how they're doing. Or also if you can, I think it's like the heat sensor, you can see them cluster. Yeah. So colony collapse disorder. This is actually not many people understand why it's happening, but like just queen abandons. There's capped brood. There's capped brood, but they're just abandoned, and they're going for honey, or more than brood when both are removed. Honey, brood, pollen abandoned. There's stuff there. Why are they leaving? No one really knows why. There's not really much sign of rats, moths, or pests. Small hive beetles. That's what SHB stands for. But it might be based off of like two factors: recruitment, which is how much you're getting in, brood rearing, and attrition, which is loss of workers, which is due to old age or death due to disease, or sick bees, which is altruistic departure. Yeah. And here's the spectrum you can see between a healthy colony and a dying colony. And there's always a continuum, but not everyone sees that continuum. Now, here's the what do you call it? Fulcrum with the teeter-totter seesaw, where you basically will have recruitment in the spring, and then you have a low winter dearth. Tipping point is a fulcrum, right? Now, when we have a lot of recruitment, or what we can do is we can shift this fulcrum, this tipping point, by giving good nutrition, favorable weather. We can't really control the favorable weather, but we can maybe give them good nutrition if we plant flowers or something, or if we give them sugar water, I guess. Basically, that helps the colony strength. But if there's poor nutrition, toxins, parasites chilling, they basically teeter-totters that way, and the colony strength declines. And that dwindles, getting to the point of colony collapse. If bees are consistently having this poor nutrition, tossing to parasites, then they will not, they will leave. They'll find another place to be like, oh, this is a nice place. Yeah, it's a box. Yeah, it has a lot of good dimensions, but we don't have all the nutrients we need, so we need to go and leave. So don't just make sure that your hive is good for you. Make sure it's good for them as well. Now, this was pretty confusing, but the only thing I'm going to focus on is um, that although things will be happening to your hive, you'll be able to see that sick bees are flying off because they know that um, this is a super colony, super organism, and they want the colony to survive. Even if they're going to die or even if they're sick, they're not going to affect the rest of the hive. So if you see like a sick bee or if you see a bee on the ground, don't pick it up. Just leave it on the ground or something because it may be sick, um, and the hive will know what to do. Just make sure that the queen is safe and manage the hive. Um, Now, yeah, so there's pests, right? And these all lead to death and stuff, but the beekeeper also applies stuff. So you want to make sure there's no pesticides that are used, or if you are going to use pesticides, or like yeah, then use them during the night if you have to, because if it's a liquid one, because if they spray it, then the bees will think it's nectar or something, and they'll drink it, and they'll bring poison into their into their hive. So, but when you do it during the night, then um, it basically dries up, and then they don't go for that. So if you have like roaches outside, you don't want to do that during the night. But yeah, this is the last thing I want to talk about. It was being a beehaver, hobbyist beekeeper, and observant beekeeper. The beehaver is the type of guy or girl or whatever you are, to not realize that it's a spectrum and just see that there's help. He'll just see a hive and then he'll see there's not a hive. So he'll be like, "What happened?" A hobbyist beekeeper will be able to see that he's heading in one direction or another, but he won't have a for sure understanding of it. But an observant beekeeper, he knows or she knows or they know um, every single step of the colony. They know where at what direction the colony is going, and you want to be this type of guy because um, you don't want to open up your hive in the springtime and all you see are a bunch of your dead BBs. You gotta take care of them because they'll take care of you by giving you honey, and bringing you joy to your life if you take care of them. Yeah. So if you have any comments or anything, just go and post them. I'll look at them, I guess, when I have time. But thanks for listening.